Hello everybody, welcome back to a brand new video, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at some recent polling we've gotten from three critical Senate races and what I think they mean, as well as my predictions for these races. So we're just going to get right into it. We're going to dive deep into these three polls, and I'll tell you whether I think they are reliable, what I think we can take away from them, and what I think is likely to happen, what I think the reaction from both parties is going to be. So the first poll that I'm going to be looking at here is the North Carolina Senate poll between Ted Budd and Sherry Beasley. And it showed, surprisingly, that Sherry Beasley was up by 4%, which is the best poll we've gotten for Democrats in this Senate race. I think this is the second poll that has Sherry Beasley leading. I'll actually look at that right now. When you go to North Carolina, specifically the most recent poll, obviously, talking about right here, had Beasley up 4. We saw another poll that had her up 5 over Pat McCrory, because McCrory was the weakest candidate for the GOP, but he lost the nomination to Ted Budd. And the more recent polls, after Budd got the nomination, had him up by 8, and had him up by 2, and had him up by 1. So we've kind of gotten a mixed bag. The Budd plus 8 poll was really good for him. It was from East Carolina University, which actually did a poll on Georgia we'll be looking at in a few minutes. But it was quite a good poll for Ted Budd. And then the more recent polls we've gotten, especially post the Roe leak, we saw a GOP internal only having him up by 2, and we saw this Survey USA A-rated poll, which you'd think would be pretty good, having him down by 4. So this poll on the surface doesn't look that great. You wouldn't think that you really wouldn't expect for a poll out of North Carolina to have the Democrats up by 4 in a supposed red wave environment, and especially considering the fact that Sherry Beasley still maintains the polling disadvantage here. Now it's 3% smaller than it was 2 days ago. She was down by 5.5 2 days ago. She's now only down by 2.3%. So certainly the poll closed the gap. But you'd think that if we were seeing polls which the GOP were winning by 8 or even ahead by 2, you wouldn't be getting polls the Democrats are winning, because polls generally in the past have overestimated Democratic support. Now, this year, that's up for debate. I think that the polling we've gotten this year has made a lot more sense than it has in 2020, because in 2020, we saw polls that had Biden winning Texas. He was ahead in Florida by double digits. He was competitive in Ohio and Iowa. We even saw polls that had him within 5% in Utah, Arkansas, Missouri. And those polls didn't make sense, and I never really trusted them. I didn't really take them seriously. And these polls, Beasley plus 4 isn't a number I'll be buying anytime soon. But the poll, at a more broad level, the polling we've seen for 2022 actually does make more sense. Like most of the numbers we're getting out of polls aren't that bad. They aren't like numbers that you'd say, oh, that's ridiculous. Some polls aren't great, but most of the numbers we're getting at face value are pretty good. And we couldn't have said that in 2020 or even in 2016. So I think that this poll is worth looking at. So we're just going to read through the brief summary of it. I didn't want to pull up the crosstabs because the crosstabs are really hard to get access to, and I couldn't find them. If you want to do that, you can probably find it on Twitter, but I didn't have the time to do that. But so essentially what you're seeing here is Sherry Beasley's leading Ted Budd right now, and it's about a 4-point lead. I can't talk. And the interesting thing here is that they actually oversampled Republicans, and you'd think that in a poll where the Democrats are winning in North Carolina, they might have oversampled Democrats by a few points, but the poll was R+3 when North Carolina was an R+1 state in 2020. So it's really interesting to see that a poll that actually did have the Republican Party a slightly higher sample than they maybe should have. But it's interesting because Beasley's still winning. Now, in fairness to the GOP, there was a 5.1% credibility interval, which is just a fancy way of saying margin of error. So technically, you could take the poll for as much as Beasley plus 9, but also Budd plus 1. So it's certainly kind of a big margin of error. Most polls only give you a 1 or 2% margin of error, but this poll gives you 5%. Maybe because it's so small, but So this is just kind of the more broad overview of the race. I'm not going to read through all of this, but I didn't know this. I guess I'll point out to you guys this paragraph right here. Beasley has a cash advantage of nearly 3.3 million compared to Ted Budd having just around 1 million. So that's really good for. I didn't know that. Now that might not exist as we get to September, or, October towards the fall. But it certainly seems to me that Sherry Beasley might be in a better position than I originally anticipated. And I won't be moving my race. I mean, I might move it down to lean Republican because Beasley, I think I might have been underestimating her, but at the same time, it really depends on how much money the Democrats put in this race. If the Democrats try to win this race and they pour a lot of money into Beasley's campaign, it's probably a lean Republican race. If the Democrats ditch her by July and they just pull out and they're like, no, we're going to go to other races, it's probably a likely Republican seat. So I really do think that Sherry Beasley is in favor right now, but this poll and that the fundraise numbers for her are pretty good, and I think she's on not the right track, but I think she's doing a fairly good job. So that's North Carolina. Now that's North Carolina. I guess we can actually, what I'll do is I think I'll fill out the states here. I'll do that right quickly. So what I think I'll do is I'll just add toss up classic colors, yellow, and then confirm. So I don't really like that much actually. Maybe I'll just keep it as blank. But the normal the deal here is we're just going to fill out the states as you'd think they would go. The safe blue states, and North Carolina will be lean Democrat on this map because Sherry Beasley would be ahead in this poll. New Hampshire is obviously not safe, but I think that's what I'll do here. And then the Democrats were also winning Nevada and Arizona by safe margins in the polling data we've got. I don't think they're going to be safe, but that's what the polling data says. And then when you take a look at Ohio's really close. I think Ohio would be tilt Republican. Wisconsin, we don't have a ton of polling there, but I think I'll just keep it as Republican. Pennsylvania, and we'll talk about that in a second. I'll fill that out. But the interesting thing here is then when you look at Georgia, we're going to see that the GOP in Georgia is not having a great time in the Senate race for whatever reason. So when you look at this poll, they asked voters how they'd vote in the governor matchup, the Senate matchup, the presidential matchup between Trump and Biden, and then Biden approval. And so the first thing you can notice is that Joe Biden is not having a good time in Georgia. He is down 16% in net approval, which is really bad for him in a state he won just 2 years ago. So you'd think that he'd be at least competitive, but no, he's down 16% in net approval, and that is really that's not great for him. But that doesn't really matter because he's not on the ballot yet. Now, in fairness, if he were on the ballot, he'd probably lose Georgia. As you can, if you look at the polling data here, one of the questions they asked was Trump versus Biden. Right about here, I think, yeah, Trump versus Biden 2024 if it were held today. And nearly 47% said they'd vote for Trump and 40% said they'd vote for Biden, which would give you about a Trump-less 6.5% margin, which I don't really buy that. But, well, I mean, I buy it. But what I'm saying is that I don't think Georgia would vote for Trump by 6.5% in 2024 or 2022 or whatever. Because a lot of the undecideds are probably Biden voters from last time who'd vote for Biden again, but just don't want to say it because Biden's not, in their eyes, a great president. And so I think that when you look at that, the enthusiasm gap really shows in the polls for Biden. But the people who are saying they wouldn't vote for that, they're undecided in that poll, are saying they'd vote for Abrams or saying they'd vote for Warnock. So they're probably Democrats anyways. They just don't really like Biden because that's the thing. A lot of the people who disapprove of Biden, the reason Biden's approval is so low is because a lot of progressive Democrats or Democrats who just have beef with him for personal reasons or whatever, just say they disapprove or say they don't know if they approve of Biden, but they'll vote Democrat anyways. So I really think that the GOP shouldn't be like this is still a bad number for Joe Biden because still the majority of voters disapprove of him, which is not what you want to see. But at the same time, the GOP shouldn't be acting like this is guaranteeing them victories in every swing state because it's not, as we see in these polls. So this poll is, when you ostracize the Senate numbers, this poll is pretty good for Republicans. So we'll read it out. So everyone in this poll is registered to vote in Georgia, which makes it a better poll than, if they're likely voters. Again, Biden had a minus 16 net approval, which is quite bad for him. We'll talk about the Senate in a second. But the interesting thing here is that when you ask them about the governor's race, most of them, or not most of them, but Brian Kemp had a 5.4% lead over Stacey Abrams. When you add in the leaners, which are the people who say they're undecided but are leaning towards a candidate, that number increases to 45.3% for Abrams and 50.8% for Kemp. So it's still about a 5-point margin of victory for Brian Kemp, and he's still in a good position here. But so Kemp is definitely favored as of right now. I have his race as lean Republican. And I talked about the Trump thing. But the interesting thing here is that, Trump's ahead, Kemp's ahead. But most interestingly, the GOP has a much higher favorability rate than the Democrats do. 44% of Georgia voters said they vote for the Democratic candidate in their district. 49% said they vote for the Republican candidate in their district. And again, another 6% were undecided, or another 7% were undecided. So Yeah, that's not great for Democrats considering that they're down 5 in the generic ballot in Georgia. In 2020, I think they lost the generic ballot by like 2 or 3% in the state of Georgia. I don't exactly remember, but it's it's still a rightward trend from 2020. And if the Democrats do lose the generic ballot in Georgia by 5%, they're probably losing the governor's race by a similar amount, and they're probably just barely losing the Senate race if I had to guess. But yeah, so this section of the poll isn't good for Democrats. This is still a pretty good poll for Democrats. I'll explain why in a second. But like if I'm a Democrat and I have to be pessimistic about the poll, this is what I'm looking at right here. Because when you're down 5% just statewide, just generic ballot, not Biden, not Warnock, not Abrams, not even Obama or Kamala Harris, but they're down. Congressional Democrats are down 5% statewide in Georgia, and that is a bit of a problem for them because if they're down 5, they're probably having to invest more in Sanford Bishop's district, the second district, which is going to be competitive. They're probably going to have to invest more in the Senate race because if their congressional candidates are doing poorly, they're going to have to they're going to end up dragging down Warnock and Abrams. So that to me is more concerning for Democrats. But yeah, so. Uh, uh, I guess I'll get to the Senate part of the poll now. I was gonna look at like the crosstabs, but there's a lot of them, and I can't get through them in like a 15-minute video. What I will say is that the poll looks pretty good. Like when you take a look at who they surveyed, they have 6% more females than males, and that's about what happened in Georgia in 2020. When you look at male versus females, actually they actually undersampled females, looks like, which are a more Democratic voting bloc. But in Georgia, as you can see, females made up 56% of the electorate in 2020. In this poll, they made up 52%, 53% of the electorate, so it's pretty good. In terms of age range, when you look at the largest group here, it's 50 to 64-year-olds. I think it's a bit of an oversample of the GOP because the largest group, well, they don't do it the same way, but the largest group here was 45 to 64, but that wouldn't the issue here is that they include the 45 to 50 range, which is not in this poll. They also oversampled boomers by a bit. They had them at 20%. They made up 19% of the electorate, and the share, like the boomer share of the electorate, decreases every year because obviously, unfortunately, some boomers pass away because they're the oldest. They're kind of at the end of their time on Earth, right? So that's just the nice way of saying boomers unfortunately do pass away. And as a result of that, they make up a smaller share of the electorate every time. So yeah, that's it for age range. I think age was pretty good too. Now, race and ethnicity is probably the most important part, and they had white voters making up 61% of the electorate here, which is exactly what they made up in 2020. And the thing about this is that this is the critical number here, right? Like in 2020, black voters made up just under 30% of the electorate. In this poll, they make up about 29% of the electorate. So yeah, it's pretty spot on right here, to be honest with you, in Georgia. But the thing here is that white voters are like, that's a big group. 61% of the state is white, and obviously Trump's going to win white voters in Georgia. Walker and Kemp are going to win white voters in Georgia by a lot. But the part of that matters is whether rural, non-college educated white voters make up a bigger share of the white vote than suburbanites. Because suburbanites are more open to Democrats. They're more split. A lot of them will vote for Warnock and Abrams. A lot of them won't. But rural white voters are much more partisan Republicans. So that's the issue here. Yeah, but like I said, this poll is pretty good. Like they have everything pretty spot on. It matches 2020. So this is a poll I really like, and I think the Democrats should like it too because this is the kicker for Democrats. Raphael Warnock's up by 0.4% overall. When you add in leaners, people leaning towards him, and Herschel Walker, he's up by 0.8%. So it's essentially a Warnock plus one poll, despite the fact that at face value he's down. The Democrats are down 5 in the generic ballot. Biden's down 16% approval. He's down 7% in presidential election, and Abrams is down 5%. But despite all those good numbers for the GOP, they're still losing the Senate race. Like this is aside from the Senate numbers, this is a good poll for the Republicans. They're winning essentially every race except for the Senate race. And that is very concerning for the GOP because if they get these numbers on election day, they'll be pretty happy. But if it's will it be enough for them to carry Walker over the edge? Because Walker's a bad candidate. He clearly has mental health problems. He clearly is not. He has abuse allegations. I won't comment on those because I don't want to get into that. But he has if you believe half the things that are said about Herschel Walker, he's not a stable or he's not a person who is qualified to hold office in the United States Senate. I'm not commenting whether I think that or not, but what I am saying is that if you do believe the things that are said about Herschel Walker, you probably believe that too. And so Herschel Walker's a bad candidate. He's going to run behind every other Republican. Raphael Warnock's a good candidate for the Democrats. He's going to be definitely the best performing Democrat in Georgia as a whole in November. And so when you talk about this race, the GOP are really going to need to rack it up, and they're doing it in this poll, and still not enough to get Warnock to lose. Right? Biden will probably be about the same in approval in November as he is now. It might get a little better for him as the election season heats up and as more Democrats head back to Biden camp. But yeah, I don't really think that the GOP are going to be too because I've heard rumors that Warnock is up for in GOP internals. I've heard rumors that McConnell wants to pull out of Georgia and just focus on Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Arizona. And I've heard rumors that the GOP didn't want Walker to be their candidate in the first place, and he only got it because Trump endorsed him. And so that is just it's Georgia on the surface is a really good pickup opportunity for Republicans. But when you look deeper into the race, it just doesn't look good. When you get polls like this that consistently have Raphael Warnock winning when he's running ahead of every Democrat by a substantial amount, just to me, I think that unless you think that a lot of Republicans are going to come home for Herschel Walker and start turning away from the polls and what we're seeing here, then I think Raphael Warnock, you can make a very good argument for him being favored. So this is not a good poll for the Georgia Republicans, especially in the Senate, and I think they should be very worried about the Senate race. Now, next poll we're going to get to, or I guess the final poll we're going to get to, obviously in the governor poll, they had Mastriano down by 5, but we're talking about the Senate poll because that's what this video is about. And Fetterman is up by 9 over Dr. Oz. So that's a very good poll for John Fetterman. And yeah, that's that to me just says a lot about how bad that primary was for the Republicans, because it was an 800 vote margin of victory for Dr. Oz over David McCormick, and I think that the wounds from that primary will eventually heal for the GOP, but yeah, Oz is not in a good position right now. I still think he's favored because I think Fetterman personally is pretty overrated, but yeah, Dr. Oz, I think, poses a lot of issues for the GOP because he's not from Pennsylvania. He doesn't know he hasn't run a campaign before. He doesn't know how to win statewide. The GOP are gonna have to invest, I think, more money in Oz than they originally anticipated against Fetterman, because right now I think neither are really running outstanding. It's early, but I think neither are really running outstanding campaigns right now. But Fetterman's probably doing a little better. In this poll, he's up by 9%, and Shapiro's up by 4%, which, by the way, doesn't make any sense because I don't know who's the consensus is that Shapiro was going to run ahead of Fetterman, and I think that, and yet in this poll, Fetterman is running 5% ahead of Josh Shapiro. So that's pretty interesting to say the least. But yeah, so let's look at this poll. So similar to Georgia, Biden's not doing well in Pennsylvania. He's down 15%. In terms of approval, his favorability is a little better. He's down 10% favorability. And the interesting thing, this is what's really interesting to me, is they asked voters about a lot of Pennsylvania figures, and the only ones that were really doing well were the two Democrats running at the top of the ticket, which are John Fetterman and Josh Shapiro. Biden's not popular. Dr. Oz is certainly not popular. Mastriano's okay, he's -1. Toomey is not popular for whatever reason, which I don't really believe. And Tom Wolf isn't that popular either. But Fetterman is +18 in approval or favorability, sorry. And Shapiro's up by that's 17 in favorability. So clearly the Democrats in Pennsylvania, I don't think Fetterman and Shapiro are +17, +18 approval. I think they might be net favorable, but I don't think it's by +18 or by 18 and 17%. I think it's a lot lower than that. But clearly there's a disparity here. Clearly Biden's not popular. Clearly Dr. Oz and Mastriano are less popular than Fetterman and Shapiro, even if you don't believe the exact numbers of this poll. And so I think that as a result of that, what you're getting is, look, the Democrats in Pennsylvania have a tendency to run ahead. In 2020, Josh Shapiro won his attorney general race by 5%. He ran 4% ahead of Joe Biden. The Pennsylvania Democrats generally do, statewide and locally, a lot better than their federal cousins, because Democrats in Pennsylvania, federally, will generally lose the state sometimes. They might choke Senate races like 2016. They might lose the presidential race like in 2016. They lost the Senate race here in 2010. Whereas even in 2014, which was a red wave year, the Democrats won the governorship by 9%. In 2018, they won a Senate race by 17, and the governor's race, they won a Senate race by 12, and the governor's race by 17. And in 2020, Josh Shapiro, who's the attorney general, was the best performing Democrat in the state. He won by 5. So I really think that Pennsylvania is a state that, despite the national environment, has the ability to elect Democrats. So this poll is pretty good for Democrats on the surface. But the issue here, at least what I think the issue here is that I won't read the crosses of this poll because I would have to like zoom in. It would be really weird, and it's not written well. But the main issue with this poll that I will say is that they had John Fetterman winning white voters by 1%. He was up 43%. Dr. Oz is at 42%. In 2020 in Pennsylvania, Joe Biden the Democrats lost white voters by 15%, which would mean that there is either a 16% swing towards the Democrats with white voters, which is about as likely as Jupiter and the Earth colliding within the next hour, or this poll is wrong, which is very possible because a Fetterman plus 9 poll in a state where Fetterman's probably losing as of right now is much more reasonable. So I think the poll's wrong. I think North Carolina. So here's my overall kind of dichotomy for the polls. The Georgia poll is very good. I like the Georgia poll the most. The North Carolina poll is good, like when you look at the crosstabs, but it just doesn't make sense. So I'm just kind of gonna like give it the veto. My gut says no, even though my head says yeah, this poll isn't awful. But the Pennsylvania poll that like unless Fetterman is somehow winning white voters by a point, which is very unlikely, yeah, this poll's not right. Fetterman's not winning by 9. Fetterman might win, right? I think he's currently a narrow underdog, but I don't think he'll win by 9, and I certainly don't think he'll win white voters by a point. So, yeah, that's, I guess, the takeaway for the video. Now, I'll fill out the map now. The poll has Democrats narrowly winning in Georgia, has them ahead in Pennsylvania. And so, yeah, Wisconsin, I think, would be lean just as polling, but I'd say that New Hampshire New Hampshire probably be likely polling, and Washington would be likely too. But and then Florida, I think, would technically be lean because of the polls that had Demings up, and Missouri would also be likely. But yeah, that's the Senate map based on polling right now. It's pretty good for Democrats. They're winning Nevada and Arizona easily. They're taking Pennsylvania. They're taking North Carolina. They're taking Georgia. They're competitive in Ohio and Florida, and Wisconsin potentially too, although we need more polling on that. And then Missouri, if Eric Greitens gets the nomination, it's competitive. If not, it's really not competitive. But yeah, pretty good Senate map for Democrats as of right now, at least according to polling data. I'll show you my prediction in a few weeks. But thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video.